we have determined which gavel I'm allowed to use. We will start with a roll call. Ms. Folsom, here?
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.
Anderson,
Here.
Practice,
Here.
Dewar,
Here.
Hill,
Here.
alternate Lawson,
Here.
Zimmerman.
Here.
Coletta, we have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Folsom. Mr. Mayor, would you lead us this morning in the Pledge of Allegiance, sir?
Shall. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. That takes us to item number 3, public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone under public comment? I have no cards. Is there anyone wishing to speak at this time? All right, I will close public comment, bring it back to the board. Possible board comments or acknowledgements. Commissioners, anyone? Okay, I will close board comments. That takes us to item number 5, approval of the agenda. Does anyone need to take anything out of order? Looking for a motion.
Move to approve?
Second.
Have a motion by Anderson, second by Hill. Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, I will close public comment, bring it back to the board. A motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That takes us to item number 6, approval of the minutes for the December 8th, 2022 TUMO Board meeting. Are there any emendations to those minutes? Looking for a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Have a motion by Ms. Breckus, second by Ms. Hill. Let me call for public comment. Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk? No. Okay. Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That takes us to item number 7, recognition of the Tahoe Pyramid Trail founder, Janet Phillips. And Mr. Zimmerman, I'll let you open this, and then I'll jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you know, Janet Phillips was instrumental in really spearheading, the water resources in the Truckee Meadow for what was then Sierra Pacific Power Company there, at the beginning of the negotiations of TROA, and was really just, instrumental and a fearsome advocate for water resources for this community. And so we just wanted to recognize her in passing and just, recognize and give thanks for everything that she's done for water resources in this community.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. I'm gonna say a few words, but before we do that, I'd like you to join me in a moment of silence for Ms. Phillips. And then I'll say a few things, and then I don't know whether we have some folks here that either from staff who were close with Janet, or I don't know whether there's any family members today. So if you just join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you so much. So I have a little bit of a different recollection because of my interactions with Janet than many of you. I knew Janet from Sierra Pacific, but I knew Janet more because I knew her husband, who was a phenomenal artist, Mike Phillips, who sadly also passed away. Mike was he turned art bowls, and in fact, if you look up Mike Phillips art bowls, you'll see that he was in Santa Fe art studios. I mean, he was in Monterey. He was everywhere. He was just a phenomenal artist. I actually knew them more through that side because of the fact that I was doing photography for Mike. And Mike, of course, was doing some work for me as well. He was spinning finials, but I digress. That is when I first really got to know Janet and her passion. And I will tell you, nobody was more passionate about the Tahoe Pyramid bike trail than Janet. If you recall, she would show up at meeting after meeting after meeting for us and was just deeply, deeply involved. That trail is a true legacy in our community, and it's really a phenomenal legacy. And I don't know, and perhaps staff, perhaps you can tell me, they call it the Tahoe Pyramid Trail, but is there any way that we can ask potentially to have it renamed and put Janet's name on that thing? You know, like, you know, potentially the Phillips Tahoe Pyramid Trail or something of that nature,
I think it's definitely something worth talking to the trail about.
okay? Do they have and forgive my ignorance, do they have an organization with the board? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good.
And I know also they can do, mile marker recognitions. and
Mile
stuff like
marker
that, so we could-
recognitions would also be great.
We can look into that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that would be lovely. Commissioners, anyone else? Yes, Ms. Hill, go ahead.
I had the great honor to work with Ms. Phillips on the connection between really Sparks and Story County, and it's something that still needs to be done. There is a railroad crossing that she and I met with UP on several times. She was so tenacious, but the railroad, as we all know, they have a lot of jurisdiction in this country. So I think that it would be great if we could continue to help with those connections and continue to push on connecting our community to that great outdoors, and also ensuring that they're safe, because she recognized that there's a lot of people that are on those unmarked parts of trails that aren't sanctioned, that are not safe. So I just really thank her for her work for our community.
That's lovely. You know, and I think what we can possibly do, Ms. Hill, is our respective organizations, we can work collaboratively through those organizations, maybe not necessarily through TUMWA, but through those organizations to try to get some of that accomplished. That's great. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Stewart, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just also wanted to speak about Janet and her incredible commitment to our community, her incredible results that she got both while at Sierra Pacific. I worked with her during the 90s, during the negotiations on the river. And as others have said, she was incredibly intelligent and passionate and also very focused on end results. So we're just incredibly lucky to have her in our community. And then what she did after she left Sierra Pacific, the work that she's done on not just the bike path, but for many, many years through the American Water Resource Association and the Nevada Water Resource Association, she led tours, sometimes twice a year along the river. They were multi-day tours. I had my staff always go on the tour to get an orientation about the river. So she knew the river like no one else. And it's an incredible loss to our community, but we will live on based on the legacy that she leaves. We'll continue to be inspired by her. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful words and wonderful thoughts. Anyone from staff that would like to make any comments about Ms. Phillips? Welcome. Ms. Morris, it's nice to see you.
So I had the opportunity to work with Janet and read through all of Janet's notes on TROA, and she was instrumental and a very meticulous note taker, which was helpful and sometimes not so helpful. At any rate, I also just wanted to say that Janet was funny and fun to be around and just a really good person. And she, only on the bike trail, but she served on the Truckee River Fund for many, many years and was instrumental in selecting projects that are not only beneficial for the environment, but for, protecting our water supply and water quality. So she was a great example for all of us. And I hope that we continue to carry on her traditions and her personality and just that sort of not giving up. She'll ask and ask. I think she asked me to help with CEQA on the California portion of the bike trail. After we were done working, she's like, "You're an environmental lawyer, you can help on this." So I love that. Thank you.
No, her legacy will certainly live on. You know, it's interesting how faceted the memories are. Each one of us have kind of a different memory because she was a multifaceted person and her family, just great folks in our community. Anybody else? Yes, please, come on down. Hi, Kim, how are you?
Good, thank you. For the record, Kim Mazeras, I had the pleasure of working with Janet for nearly 30 years, starting at Sierra Pacific. And then after she started the trail, I remember talking to her in 2002 probably, because we just celebrated 20 years of the trail starting construction, and that started in 2003. So in about 2002, she says, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and it'll just take a few years. So I've heard today tenacious, I've heard fierce, I've heard intelligent. I'll add persistence to that. She has also left a wonderful board who is dealing with everything trail related. For those of you on this board, and to take back to your own jurisdictions, Mary Beth Roselli is currently their board chair, but Chris Askin from the Community Foundation is going to take over that board in another year or so for at least a couple of years. So they've got a great group that is determined to get to Story County, to get through Story and Lyon and complete the last about 19 to 20% of the trail. So I too appreciate Janet and all she has done. And I can't remember the number of times, and John doesn't know this story, that staff would come to me at Tumwa and go, she can't, it's okay, we're gonna get through this. We will figure out how to make it work for us and for the trail users and for their board. So I will miss her greatly and appreciate you recognizing her here today.
Kim, before you leave, do you know, is the Community Foundation, are they managing the funds for?
They have got an endowment set up at the Community Foundation
Okay.
for the trail. They had
Okay.
a very large bequest left to them, between $1.5 million and $2 million, that's going to help with the maintenance of the trail over time. So the Community Foundation is managing that
Okay,
piece.
good, that's good information, thank you so much.
Yep.
Anyone else? Yes, yeah, Terry, please, come on up. Is it still Svedich? Did it?
Yes, my name is Terry Svedich, and I'm currently on the advisory board for the Truckee River Fund. And I remember when the Truckee River Fund was established, and I believe that Janet had been the president of the advisory board from its inception. She was very professional as well. So if we're talking all the different adjectives, she was a great facilitator. And there were times that were very challenging. And I'm a recent addition to the advisory board, just a couple of years, but I used to go before the board requesting funds for grants for City of Reno, and she did a great job to facilitate, because sometimes it was very challenging. But anyway, I got to work with her on the advisory board. I got to work with her on the tours of the Truckee River. I learned so much from her. I got to spend time picking apples with her in her backyard, and it was delightful to get to spend time with her and learn and appreciate what she had to offer. So again, I am also appreciative that you're taking the time to recognize her today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Okay. She will be deeply missed. Her legacy will, though, obviously live on. And so I look forward to hearing back, Mr. Zimmerman, about and talking to the board, just to see if there's a way that we can honor her perhaps in a different way. And they're probably already talking about it. I'm sure they are. She was just such a force of nature. I think that's the only way I can describe it. Okay, thank you so very much. That takes us now to item number 8, water supply. Mr. Hauk. So, Bill, are we officially out of the drought now? Is it no longer red on the map?
Morning, Mr. Chair, board members. So I've got some good news for you. It's about time, right, Mr. Hunting? So the last 3 weeks have seen a flurry of winter storms, AR events mixed in, brought rises in the main stem, Truckee River, localized flooding, but it's also brought a lot of water, added a lot of water to our snowpack upstream, much needed. As of yesterday, snowpack totals in the Truckee and Tahoe basins are about 250% of normal. That's 250% of median, but this is a great map, but I always chuckle when I see it because you'd think, there's no mountains in California. This is because California DWR has its own snow surveying program in the NRCS, and they really don't coordinate. So that's why there's no snowpack totals here in California, if you were interested. As of Monday morning, look at the black line. That's the water equivalent or snow water equivalent in the snowpack compared to 2022 and 2017 and normal. You can see that we're actually ahead of 2017 at this point. We've blown past the snowpack we saw last year in 2022, and we're actually, as of Monday, we're 114% of the median for the end of March, early April is when the snowpack kind of peaks, and we're already 114% of that at this point. So things are really looking good. And the runoff forecast, the last one issued by the NRCS on January 1st, based on the amount of water content in the snowpack, looks really good for us. The most likely forecast is showing a 2.1 foot rise, 181% of average at Lake Tahoe. That's the most likely scenario. And a similar scenario for the Truckee River at Fairhead, with 176% of normal runoff projected between April and July.
Quick question on Lake Tahoe. I thought I saw someplace recently. Is Lake Tahoe above the natural rim now by about a foot?
I'm a slide away from showing you that and explaining that.
All right. Well, but I wanted to tie it back.
Yep, I'm tying it all in
All
right
right,
now.
go ahead.
to
I
our talk.
apologize.
So this is the projection for Lake Tahoe, that 2.1 foot rise between April and high. You'll notice the gray line, which is the projected from here on out, shows a 3+ foot rise. And the reason for that is between now and April, Tahoe will continue to rise as we get more storms and precip directly, increases the lake elevation. But interestingly enough, and to your point, Lake Tahoe has risen about 1.8 feet since December 1st, which was the low last year. So things are really looking up, and this is the most likely projection from this point forward. And that's very welcome after 3 years of drought, where Lake Tahoe has basically been on a drain or a decline for the last 3 years. So
And that 1.8 foot rise in Tahoe is technically enough to almost fill Stampede.
1.8, yeah, it is. It's over 200,000 acre feet.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so that's great.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's just Tahoe.
That's just Tahoe.
Yeah.
And all reservoirs received a little bump as a result of the rainstorms and the precip we've seen over the last 3 weeks, for sure. So, but none more than Tahoe.
Thank you.
So to that point, looking at the forecast and the snow water equivalent up there, it's looking like all of the reservoirs in the system will see a significant recovery this year, if not a full recovery. In fact, the only reservoir that's not projected to fill at this point is Stampede, but it's still projected to be about 90% full by summer, so which is pretty good. And that means great news for river flows. This is actual and projected for the last 13 years. You can see in gray is what's projected to come through the end of the year. And this is just a closer snapshot. So, and interestingly enough, just to explain the projection here for river flows, the rest of the year, that's after filling up the reservoirs upstream. So there's going to be a lot of water coming in, filling up those reservoirs. That's what's going to be coming across the state line, and through town. So upstream storage, right now there's about 307,000 acre feet up there. Most of that water's in Lake Tahoe, And about 58,000 acre feet of that, or about 19% of the total, is managed by TUMWA between our privately owned stored water and the water we have stored under the terms of TROA. So, but like I said, most of the reservoirs upstream are looking like they're gonna fill this year. Stampede's the only one that's not projected to fill at this point, but 90% full is full enough, so.
So, in the future, Mr. Houck, can you add one thing to this graphic? Can you add the capacities, the 744,600 acre feet in
You bet.
Tahoe, the 226,500 in
do that.
Stampede, Boca, et cetera?
And this is a snapshot I took of Donner Lake Dam yesterday morning. You can see there's a lot of snow up there, so just kind of a feel-good story at this point. So,
Unless you have to shovel it.
you tell me. Yeah, my back's still feeling. So, takeaway message for this presentation. Chances are very good. We're gonna have a normal or probably better than average year. Snowpack right now is about 250% of the median for both basins upstream. Runoff forecasts are 180% of normal right now. Tahoe elevation's already increased by 1.8 feet since its low on December 1st. Projected to rise another 2 feet between July and its high, but another 3 feet likely between now and July. All upstream reservoirs will make a significant, if not full recovery. Normal river flows projected through this year into next year. Our upstream reserves are still in excellent shape, and this is really the kind of winter we needed to make a recovery from the last 3 drought years. So this is what we're looking for. With that, I'll take questions.
Amazing. Commissioners? Any questions for Mr. Houck? So I'm just gonna make one statement, and that is good hydro generation year.
It is. It's gonna be, and on that note, Verdi Power Plant was brought back online this morning.
Good.
Fleisch Plant was brought back online a couple weeks ago, and
Good.
Ryan Dixon's here if you want any more detail.
No,
information.
I mean, you know, that's,
Yeah, and flows are up.
Yeah.
You know, we're more than able to generate with the water that's in the river right now, and we're gonna have normal river flows at least through this year, probably well into next year based on
no,
just the snowpack.
that's good news for TUMWA and obviously good news for ratepayers because it
It is.
offsets costs. So I cannot overstate enough. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Anyone else? Thank you so much, Mr. Houck.
Welcome.
Well done. Okay, that takes us now to item number 9, discussion and action on the adoption of Resolution 313, a resolution to approve the annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. Mr. Bowman and Ms. Cardinal, welcome.
All right, good morning, members of the board. I'm Sophie Cardinal. I'm TUMWA's financial controller, and I took over this position from Matt in March of last year. And just a little disclaimer, I got into accounting for the numbers, not the public speaking, so please bear with me as I adjust to all of this. I told myself. I know, right? It's a mom joke, but I told, thank you. I told myself that I'm gonna try to be like Steph over there, who is like a trained lawyer and really good at this stuff. But anyway, I'm here to talk about the fiscal year 22 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, which we call the ACFR for short. As a refresher, the ACFR is comprised of 4 main sections: the introduction, the financial section, the statistical section, and the compliance section. TUMWA's finance staff drafts the report, and then it's audited by our external auditors, Eide Bailly. Matt has previously presented the results of our fiscal year 22, showing that TUMWA is in great financial shape, so I'm not gonna go over those again today. Instead, I'll highlight a few key topics from the overall report. First, and probably most importantly, TUMWA received an unqualified audit opinion from Eide Bailly. This means that the auditors believe that our financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. It's the best audit opinion that they can give, so that was really great. Second, TUMWA implemented GASB Statement Number 87, which is a new accounting standard for leases issued by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Among other things, it resulted in TUMWA recognizing lease receivables as a lessor from 4 different agreements. Third, this year, Eide Bailly also performed a single audit of our federal grant awards. They found that TUMWA complied with all applicable compliance requirements in all material respects. That's a mouthful. The CFA, which is the Schedule of Expenditures of Financial Awards, shows our grant expenditures for the year and can be found in the compliance section of the ACFR. And finally, there was one issue that popped up right before we were set to issue our ACFR. While performing their audit procedures, Eide Bailly identified a reporting error in our classification of investments within the statement of cash flows. Basically, TUMWA had always considered our investments to be cash equivalents, but they shouldn't have been. This resulted in Eide Bailly issuing a finding in our internal controls. We did correct for it right away by reclassifying our balances. More information on that is in Note 14 and can also be found in the compliance section of the ACFR. Our auditors are also here in the audience to field any questions. So those are the major highlights. I'll end by thanking the finance staff who helped compile the ACFR, Matt, of course, Sandra, Anna, and Mindy. They all worked really hard on it, and they made for the best team. Whew, okay. Oh, and there is one more thing I almost forgot. This agenda item also includes our fiscal year 22 PAFR, which is the popular annual financial report. It's basically like a Reader's Digest version of the ACFR, but with different stats and a lot of great diagrams. Cammie, Matt, and Robert worked on that one, so a big thank you to them too. Now I'm done. Thank you for your time, and we're ready for your questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you so much. Board, any questions for staff? Ms. Breckus?
I think the popular, I know it's a new thing, it looks really good. I like the layout a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No, great job. I couldn't be more pleased. So, as usual, TUMWA is a model in our region for just how we're managed. It's a very, very, very well-managed organization. So I'm thankful for the great staff. I'm still not happy that you left Washoe County, Ms. Cardinal, but I'm trying not to hold a grudge.
Thank you. You're gonna see me a lot more this year, just so you know.
Well, you know you have good people when they're headhunted by other organizations. So I was thankful for the time that you were at Washoe County.
Thank you so much.
What are you looking for, Mr. Bowman? You want to,
Yep, we're looking for a motion to
Accept?
accept the ACFR.
Okay.
There's a resolution that goes along with it.
Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item? I will close public comment, bring it back to the board. Looking for a motion.
Motion to approve?
Okay, hold on, Ms. Stewart. I actually already have a motion by Mr. Reese, so I will take yours as the second. So I have a motion by Reese, second by Dewar. We have asked for public comment. Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Sir.
Could we just modify the motion to
Sir?
approve the form of the resolution that staff has in the packet?
Okay, so moved. Okay, we have a modified,
Second.
we have a seconder agrees. We have a modified motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Well done. Thank you so much. That takes us now to item number 10, appointment of the trustee for the Western Regional Water Commission. Ms. Folsom.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Board, Sonia Folsom for the record. Before you, you have a staff report with a list of elected officials that could fill the vacancy made by former Commissioner Bob Lucy. The terms for his appointment to the Western Regional Water Commission will expire March 31st, 2023.
Okay. Mr. Folletta, since it expires March 31st, 2023, and we're filling that seat now, how will that occur? In other words, will it come back to us again in March? or will it extend through the next year? Does that make sense to you?
Yes,
Because,
it does
because
make
the
sense.
way I read this is we're just filling the remainder of the term.
That's right. Typically, when you make an appointment to a seat that's being vacated early,
Okay?
and in this case, it would be applicable, that individual will fill out the remainder of that term.
Okay.
And there will be a new appointment for the subsequent term.
Okay.
Whole term.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that was understood. Okay? Ms. Hill,
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to make a motion on a potential new member.
okay?
I'd like to move that Commissioner Mariluz Garcia fill this position.
Second.
Discussion on that.
Okay?
Um,
I have a motion and a second under discussion.
This is the seat to fill the STIMGID successor.
Correct.
And, you know, I came on right at the end when Washoe County Utilities was being folded into Tumwa. But before that, STIMGID got rolled into Washoe County Utilities, if I'm remembering my history. But, you know, in my length of service, I have still, it's been a while, but heard from people who are a part of that water utility. In fact, when I first came on, we had the STIMGID treasury in our books. Does people remember that?
Of course.
I think it's.
9 million or 11
Is
million
it still
dollars?
there in any way, or has it been completely bled down?
You mean the reserve?
Yeah, for the
There-
STIMGID utility.
Yes, there is some funds left in that, and that is its own line item in our budget.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's been used for maintenance and.
In that area. And for those reasons, I have an objection to not having the representative of that unincorporated community serve in this place on this board, and that would be Mike Clark, just like it was Bob Lucy. And I don't know how many of you know that this history.
I'm very familiar with it.
Okay, I don't know if the motion maker was and the seconder, but for those reasons, I don't know if he's been asked, you know, I would presume if you made a motion, you know, the other county commissioner has, but for those reasons and out of, you know, I won't say hardship, but it was a struggle for those people to get absorbed. They had their own little water utility. Growth came down their way. They felt promises were not made. They had a nice little water utility they were made to expand on and allow others to come on. I think that as long as we have that line item, we need that person who is accountable to those former people to see that money spent to serve in this seat. So I'm not going to support this motion on account of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Stewart.
I just had a quick question. I know that most of the Tumwa board is on WRWC. And I just wanted to do a quick check for those that are on Tumwa but are not on WRWC. If any of those people that were on Tumwa, just because the meetings are, you know, back to back and we deal with a lot of the same stuff. And I'm not sure who all that is, but I think it would be Mr. Reese and Mr. Lawson. So I just wondered if that mattered or if those members had any thoughts on that.
Mr. Lawson does not serve on Tumwa. He's the interim Tumwa member. That would be
Right.
Mr.
Good point.
Dare,
Okay.
who serves on
Okay,
Tumwa.
well, I'm very fine with Ms. Garcia, but I just wanted to make sure that we
Okay.
had just checked.
Okay? What's the desire?
Got a motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any other
Okay, good.
discussion? Okay? That's all I wanted to know. Is there any public comment on this item, Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Chair.
Oh. Wow. Look who just caught up. Sorry, Ms. Folsom. Forgive me. Short night. Not much sleep. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
I'm a no.
Okay, motion carries with one opposed.
And this was for nominating Mary Lou.
Mary Luz Garcia.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Okay. That takes us to item number 11, update on the 2022 interim session and discussion and action on establishing the legislative subcommittee for 2023. Ms. Morris, welcome back.
Thank you. Stephanie Morris for the record. I just want to give a quick update. We did have a subcommittee meeting just to kind of overview what we saw come out of the joint committee. And right now, as of January 13th, there were 907 BDRs, and Tom was tracking 299. A lot of them will fall off. A lot of them are there's about 60 that are HR related, that are not necessarily things that we may advocate on, but just for tracking for compliance purposes. Currently, there are 20 water rights or conservation or drought bills or BDRs and 3 water quality. So we're obviously keeping a close eye on those. And there's a number of open meeting law as well as PERS issues that we're looking at and tracking as well. So when the language comes out, of those BDRs, 133 have bill language. We're currently tracking 18. Unfortunately, most of them are things that are more compliance. There's only 2 right now that are bills that are water related. One is AB 19, which has to do with doing tribal work for water resources without a license. And then another one is AB 39, which is related to the state engineer's noticing provisions and publication. So nothing super juicy yet. And then just to follow up, we are already seeing, and this came out of the joint subcommittee on public lands and natural resources out of the summer sessions, which we've talked to you all about and we attended. But there is a request coming to participate on sort of what bills for conjunctive management might look like, and as it may or may not relate to the Lower Whites River system, as well as conservation, and those are really the key ones that they're looking for TUMWA to participate on to see what language that would look at. And it's not a surprise, again, because those were all topics that were identified out of that joint session. So that's kind of where we are. I should have said the session starts on February 6th, so it's coming up quickly. And what I'm looking for today is a motion to create the subcommittee for this session, and 3 members and 1 or 2 alternates at the board's discretion.
Who were the last members, Ms. Morris, of our, and I know this, but let's put it on the record, please.
It was Mr. Dare,
Dare? Mm-hmm.
Ms. Hill, and Mr. And the alternate was, could you say it louder?
Hill and Dewar.
Thank you.
Okay? They're the same one, they're the same ones for WRWC. That is exactly correct. So, Commissioners, what would, and I know that Mr. Dare, I have had this conversation directly with him. I know that he would like to stay on the subcommittee, as if there's no objection to that. I'm hopeful that he'll exceed the timeframes that some have said, but he is obviously in recovery.
Mr. Chair, I would like to stay on if the board so sees.
Okay?
And I am on the WRWC Legislative Subcommittee, so it's nice to have continuity.
So let me
I would
ask
say the same.
Let me ask a legal question, Mr. Folletta, please. Since Mr. Dare is out on a medical leave, would that automatically, so his alternate that has been appointed by the city of Sparks, which would be Mr. Lawson, would that automatically put Mr. Lawson into those positions because he is technically filling that seat for that member?
TUMWA's rules don't specifically contemplate that scenario.
Okay.
I would say, I think intuitively that's probably right, that Mr. Lawson would step in, but we do have the alternates who are going to be appointed here pursuant to some motion at some point. So I think it'd probably be up to this board as to how you want to handle
Okay.
that situation,
Okay.
given that you have alternates available to you.
Okay. All right, I just needed a little clarification. What's the desire? You want to just keep it the same? Because I'm okay with that.
Do you need an alternate at this time too, or do you do separate votes?
I think, Stephanie Morris for the record, whatever the board's desire is, we definitely would like one alternate so that we can have a quorum if someone is unavailable. And we can have, two alternates if that's the board's pleasure.
Well, I think we do have two alternates. We have Ms. Breckus and Mr. Anderson, correct?
Correct, but we're reforming for this, the subcommittee for this session. So if you would like one or two, it's up to the board.
Okay,
You gonna make a motion?
go ahead.
Or
Go
go ahead, Paul.
Let's,
Yeah, I was just going to make a motion to retain our current legislative subcommittee members, Dare, Hill, and Dewar, with the alternates of Breckus and Anderson.
okay. Have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Anderson, second by Hill. Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on this? Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. I have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Either congratulations or condolences. I'm not sure which, so I guess
Perhaps
that's,
both.
I guess that's yet to be seen. Okay, nobody is safe when they're in session. All right, and that's not a quote from me. I think that was a Mark Twain quote, or at least a twist on. That takes us now to item number 12, which is a public hearing considering the consideration of written bids and consideration of the possible oral bids for the sale of the surplus properties. Ms. Edmondson and Ms. Morris.
Thank you, Stephanie Morris for the record. We have not received any written bids. There were written bids that were withdrawn.
Okay,
And the process calls for the sealed bids to be opened, but I would like to just confirm with the board secretary, Ms. Folsom, that we do not have any written bids that have not been withdrawn. Thank you. And so normally, prior to accepting a written bid, we would open it up for oral bids.
Okay.
And we, normally the rules say that any oral bid has to be on the same terms and conditions as the resolution, and it has to exceed the highest written bid by 5%.
okay,
In consultation with legal counsel, Mr. Folletta, we've determined that the minimum bids, because there aren't any written bids, are as stated in the resolution, and they do not increase by 5%. And so on the second page of the staff report, you can see the minimum written bids for the property. And the beginning page outlines the process. So at this point, staff's recommendation is that Ms. Folsom would provide any oral bid cards that have been received, and that the chair would confirm that those oral bidders are present on a property by property basis, so one property at a time.
okay.
And then open it up for oral bid. And then just to remind the board that upon acceptance, the bidder has to provide Ms. Folsom a $10,000 cashier's check that's made out to Stewart Title Company, which this was the process that was identified in all of the documents that the board approved. And we're happy to answer any questions before you start the process.
Okay. Questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. So,
Mr. Chair?
yes,
a
yeah, please,
question.
Ms. Dewar, go ahead.
As we're going through this, Ms. Morris, could you identify the minimum bid that's required for us so we can have that right in front of us?
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks.
75,000 and 175,000, isn't it? Isn't that on page 2?
Yes, but it's by property number, so if you want to
Right.
start with cell number 1, the minimum bid for that is $75,000.
That's at 14746 Pine Knolls Lane, APN 016-490-27. And that also includes Zero Virginia's Foothills Drive, APN 016-490-32. Okay,
So, Mr. Chair, are there any oral bid cards for that property?
I do have an oral bid card, but what I don't have is, on this oral bid card, there is no number.
Oh, there's no property number.
No. I have an oral bid, and it's from Janet Johnson Rout and Nully Johnson Rout Family Trust.
I believe that's for the 14785 Pine Knolls Lane.
Oh, you're correct. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Forgive me. Forgive me. I had them,
That's okay.
they,
It's,
it was little to big.
there's a work, I apologize.
No, it's okay. So this one is, I do have an oral bid from Fabian, Erlene Gorzel, and I guess it's just Erlene Gorzel.
Steph Morris, for the record, could you ask to confirm that the bidder is present and if there are any other bidders on sale number one?
Okay?
And then
Are the
ask
Gorzels
them-
present today? Okay, welcome, ma'am. You are Erlene? Okay. Okay, perfect. And that is for the 14746 Pine Knolls Lane property, okay? And again, APN 016-490-27. And again, I don't have, there's nothing listed on this sheet as to your oral bid. Would you confirm what the oral bid is, ma'am? 75,000, which is the minimum, okay?
And Mr. Chair, Steph Morris, for the record, could you please call to ensure that there are no other oral bidders present that want to make a bid on this property?
Okay? Is there anyone else present that would like to make a bid on the 14746 Pine Knolls Lane property? Seeing none? Okay? Where do we go from here? So we have an oral bid of 75,000?
For this property, if the board wishes to accept that oral bid, we would ask that you make a motion and take a vote, and then collect the $10,000 cashier's check, and then we can move forward with the process.
Okay? Commissioners,
So move, Mr. Chair.
have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Ms. Hill, second by Ms. Breckus. As with all items on our agenda, Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on this? Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept the minimum bid, the minimum oral bid of $75,000. Again, that is for APN 016-490-27, including 016-490-32. The first parcel is 0.29 acres and the second one is 0.19 acres. Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, I believe, unanimously, even though my seconder,
She doesn't need to vote on it.
Okay.
The second's valid.
okay, perfect. Okay, congratulations. Why don't you come on up, sir, and identify yourself? Tell us.
Got a guy trying to do bond.
Duvon jokes.
For the record, I think legal counsel for Tumwa, as well as myself, would say there's no senior
There's no
discount.
senior discounts.
But we appreciate,
We will give you a hearty handshake and a commemorative pen. And that commemorative pin says BIC on it, by the way. Okay. Okay, very good. All right, that takes care of the first parcel. The second, and this is the second one that I have, and this is the 14785 Pine Knolls Drive, APN 016-490-50. That is 1.786 acres. The minimum bid is $175,000. Do we have Ms. Rout? Okay, so nobody's present for that?
And then could you just call to ensure there are no other oral bidders that would like to make a bid at this time?
I can. Is there anyone wishing to bid on the parcel on 14785 Pine Knolls Drive? Okay, seeing none. So how do we proceed here? Because they're not here to give us a check.
Right, so they didn't actually make an oral bid. They have to be present
Okay.
and make the bid orally. So we have no bids on that. I think if it's okay with the board, we should proceed and do call for sale number 3 and ensure that there are no oral bids. And then we can discuss next steps if there aren't for both properties.
Okay, all right, I will close sale number 2, having no one present. That takes us to sale number 3, 0 Cliff View Drive, APN 038-730-37, 2.651 acres. Minimum bid is $435,000. I have nothing in writing. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to bid? Okay. There are
Thank you.
none.
Steph Morris for the record. Our staff's recommendation is for sale number 2 and sale number 3, that we would go back and publish, it's a minimal cost, that these properties are available, and then put in new dates for oral bids and written bids to be accepted, and then we would bring it back and go through this process at our February board meeting.
Okay,
And if the board agrees, if you could make a motion.
we will. Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
This, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
This may have come up before, but on 14785 Pine Knolls, it looks like it could be 2 parcels, and would we ever go down that, or we could potentially subdivide it? Would we ever go down that route if seeing that the housing market has changed and people may not, have an appetite for such a large property? But I don't know if we discussed that as a board before.
Steph Morris for the record. In the past, because there are a number of permitting and costs associated with that, we have not explored that type of
And
action.
what I'm gonna tell you, because I actually looked at this parcel, because I thought the same thing. I'm pretty sure it's constrained.
Yeah.
I think that parcel is, there's some slope, there's some slopes on that parcel, so it's constrained, so its buildable area is very limited.
Understandable. I'm happy to make a motion to move forward with staff's recommendation.
Please? Go ahead, please. Make that
That's my motion,
Oh,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And again, staff's recommendation is to take these 2 parcels and republish them for
Republish them,
sale.
right.
And then bring it back to the board in February to go through the same process.
Okay,
And I'll second the motion.
okay, so I have a motion by Ms. Hill, second by Mr. Anderson. Do we have any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, staff. Staff. Okay. All right, that concludes item number 12. That now takes us to item number 13. Discussion on board meeting legal representation and possible direction to staff regarding the same. Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in, I think, May of 2022, Chair Hartung and Member Breckus requested staff bring back an agenda item looking at what are options for representation of Tumwa at board meetings. That would also include our Citizens Standing Advisory Committee meeting and our Legislative Subcommittee meeting. And so this item, my understanding, was limited to just representation at the board. So staff looked at that and came up with 3 alternatives. The first alternative is the status quo alternative, which is to leave in place McDonald Chrono as the Tumwa's general counsel and the legal representation at Tumwa board meetings, SAC meetings, and legislative subcommittee meetings. The benefits of that is we do have a good working relationship with the McDonald Chrono law firm. They have a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge from working with Tumwa since inception in 2001. We've had different lawyers over the years, but through those lawyers, we have a lot of institutional knowledge built up, and that's beneficial in that we don't have to, educate new lawyers on how Tumwa's internal practices work. our water resources, working with our engineering department and others on kind of the forum agreements that we have and how we operate. The firm, McDonald Carano, also has a broad array of experienced attorneys, so whether that's litigation, where we use and rely on Matt Addison, who's a really good trial attorney, to assist the board members and staff. But that's also not to say that we don't use other law firms outside of the board meeting representation. So we use Gordon DePoli from the law firm of Woodburn and Wedge for TROA matters, water right matters, or if there's a conflict with a potential engagement of McDonald Carano, and internal lawyers such as myself and Ms. Morris feel it's imperative to get outside legal counsel opinion on that. We have Mr. DePoli look at the conflict and advise us as such. We also use Paul Liparelli, retired Washoe County District Attorney, in case there's a conflict or an absence for meetings. And then between myself as a lawyer and Ms. Morris as a lawyer, we have two individuals on staff that do quite a bit of legal work as well. Ms. Morris, after taking over my position, does the lion's share of work internally with Tumwa staff and is the go-to on that. So that would be the first option, would be status quo. The second option would be to use Ms. Morris as the attorney representing at the board, SAC, and legislative subcommittee meetings. Ms. Morris has the experience and is definitely well qualified to do that. My concern there is that Ms. Morris is helping John Enlow with water resource matters, learning from Gordon DePoli on TROA matters, and that there are higher value projects that I would want her to be working on. Not that that representation at the board level ties up a lot of time, but there is a time commitment to it that I think her value is better placed elsewhere. So that's my thought there. And then the third option would be to go out and seek other legal representation, whether you do that with a request for proposal or something to that effect. I think you still risk having conflicts with other law firms who deal with parties adverse to TUMWA. And so that's where I wanted to leave it and let the board direct staff and ask any questions you have regarding how this agenda item is put forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Breckus, this is something that you've asked for, so I'll open the floor to you first.
So, thank you for bringing that up and outlining three options. I do not believe that a going on 22-year evergreen professional service contract with anybody on any matter is good public policy. I think that it should be reviewed and reanalyzed. Western Water, maybe 2 years ago, went out to bid on new legal outside counsel, and it was a very, a lot of responsive bid, and McDonald Carano, I think, obtained that contract, and I think it's just very healthy to see what's out there and to further define a relationship if the body continues to want to have outside counsel. Now, in the background, there's some discussion about when McDonald Carano was retained, and that was continued on in 2016 with a letter from Mr. Pogny saying, we go by these Nevada court rules of we won't have a conflict if we represent someone in an adverse position. I don't think that's the proper analysis for what a counsel for a public body should be doing. I think it should fall closer akin to the ethics laws that govern elected and appointed officials, because in most instances, the person who is sitting at the end of the board dais here is an appointed official, even though they're a contractor. And I think it's an open question whether or not the ethics laws govern in that way, in any way. And as you see, one of the options is to appoint your own in-house counsel. The ethics laws, in my view and understanding, are whether or not the person has a commitment in a private capacity to another, versus what I interpret as Nevada Supreme Court laws, where does McDonald Carano represent anyone who's adverse to TUMWA? In the early days, and when McDonald Carano was first retained, the record shows that they said, well, we might have a conflict with this other public body we represent, the Conservation District. And that's come up, their representation in the Conservation District over the time. But what I have seen over the time is a lot of creepage into McDonald-Corano, representing, at the same time, they're representing Tumwa, representing trade organizations that have business interests that they represent, and also private developments. And I just want to go through a few of those. This is Mr. Folletta's licensing from 2021 at the Nevada Legislature. He's representing the Nevada Home Builders Association, a geothermal organization out in Fallon that, do they entertain and play in the water rights world? I don't know. I think down toward the bottom there, or maybe the next page, he also represents the Nevada Housing Alliance, which is a trade organization, and then the Nevada State Apartment Association. I think he also represents the Builders, which is a Reno-specific group or Washoe County-specific group of the Nevada Home Builders. We routinely acknowledge that group. I think we even reserve some spots for them, if I'm not mistaken, on the SAC for these organizations. So we send out them as stakeholders. So we can't say that they're not groups that McDonald-Corano is not representing other clients who have engaged with us, because they have a commitment to these other groups who are their clients, and we call them stakeholders. And routinely someone will come before us and say, we went out to the Builders Association to get their input on this issue. Oh, you went out to our attorney's other client. Okay. I think that's a commitment in a private capacity. And even if Mr. Folletta, who is not yet registered for the 2023 session, is not going to be a lobbyist at all, and maybe he's not, or whoever his backup is under our contract, there's other folks in this law firm who represent interests that engage with us. This is Mr. Hicks. He also represents this energy group and the builders. Could you move on to the next one? And then there's Miss Fisher, also who's a registered lobbyist, represents the builders and some of these other private interests. And so, there's that. And what I understand from someone, and this was a recent conversation, if someone looks into, how law firms work, is it's not like partner over here is separate from partner over here. They all share in the economic value of the book of business of the company. So the commitment goes through the organization, from what I understand. Now, this is the City of Reno lobbyist license, active today, and another McDonald-Corano employee represents Toll Brothers. Well, I routinely hear about our staff working through these discovery processes with private development interests, negotiating against them. We had an unusual appeal hearing a couple months ago on one, so we know more about this process. McDonald-Corano is representing Toll Brothers, one of the biggest single-family detached developers in the region, before the City of Reno, and that's their book of business. Likewise, and I think this was very broadly, and I pointed it out many times. Could you go on to the last, is there a last page? Okay, there was also the Stonegate, and Hines Ranch, I think, is the one that maybe I didn't highlight. I think Ms. Fisher represents that one, or someone else represents that one to the legislature, but also registration before the City of Reno. I don't know if maybe down at the bottom. Okay, well, Hines Ranch, there was an involved discovery process with Hines Ranch Stonegate, and this firm continues to represent them. At the same time, they lobby for them for the Nevada legislature, they lobby them for the City of Reno, and they're sitting across the table with our staff doing discovery for a very involved development. I think that we should go out to bid and put a standard for responsive bids, not on these Nevada rules, but does your organization have any, or your firm or you, have any commitment in a private capacity to anyone who works and works with Tumwa, engages with Tumwa, and let us know what those are, because they have clients who have interest in our rates, in our regulations, in our rules, and our policies. And I don't think it's right I think we should have a general counsel. It's very rare that a body has a higher general counsel that is beyond, question of their other client books. And I don't think it puts staff in a good place either when they go into administrative settings and know I'm sitting up against the partner who works with the board's general counsel. So I've outlined how I view this. I think it's time to go out to bid for Tumwa to bring on new counsel. McDonald Carano's perfectly capable of competing. But the bid would show, what conflicts you have. Or, if Mr. Zimmerman says, I've got Stephanie Morris doing all these other tasks, we just need someone to sit and keep the board on open meetings law. Maybe they hire a junior person to do the open meeting law and a second attorney. I've never seen the billing numbers brought down for McDonald Carano, an outside counsel, to understand how much we're paying them over the, on a yearly basis, because they've been rolled up into other figures. But I think you could compare those numbers to what it would cost to bring on an associate. But in summary, if we're continuing down this path, I think we're hurting Tumwa in terms of transparency out into the public and our stewardship that, we are following and doing what we can to reduce conflicts of interest. And I think those exist right now. Thank you.
Chair Hartung.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Morris, go ahead.
As the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs at Tumwa, I'd like to address how we handle conflicts, and in particular, the rules of legal conflicts. And lobbying can be different, but Mr. Folletta and Mr. Pani before that, we've had a lot of discussions, and they treat lobbying like normal legal conflicts. And conflicts of interest versus legal conflicts are two very different things. If the standard that conflicts of interest apply, and if you do business with any of your stakeholders, there's no way that there would be any outside counsel that would represent this entity. I have worked for 18 years in 4 public agencies, both in-house as general counsel and through a firm who represents many California entities and some Nevada entities as general counsel by contract. And legal conflicts, in a lot of ways, are they're more strenuous, and we are very careful, and Mr. Zimmerman before me, and now the two of us together, in evaluating legal conflicts. And they are different than a conflict of interest. And it's not a stakeholder because you are engaging with a stakeholder. It's a matter by matter, and it really has to go to what confidential information is being shared with the attorney, and is there a conflict between the two entities? And when there has been the potential, even the potential for confidential information of Tumwa that would be in conflict with another entity, we have not engaged with any firm who represents us. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about legal conflicts and how we do it. I just wanted the record to be clear about the process and the differences between conflicts of interest and legal conflicts as determined by the Nevada Supreme Court.
Okay, so let me just let me make a quick comment here. And I don't know how long, Ms. Breckus, you've lived in town. I've lived here for 42 years. I had my own business. I see people sitting in the audience that were my customers. It's difficult for me to not encounter someone that I didn't have some form of relationship with, and including now, I still have a very scaled down piece of my business. Reno is truly the biggest little city in the world. It's almost impossible to find someone who has not either had relationships or have ongoing potential working relationships. It's just very, very difficult. I'm not sure that we could hire someone who's that insulated. I know the mayor worked for a firm for a long time, and I'll bet you have exactly the same kinds of situations where you encounter people that you did business with, and so I'm struggling with this, Ms. Breckus, because I don't know whether we could find someone who is as insulated as what you're potentially describing. But Commissioners, anyone else? Mr. Reese, hold on just a second. Hold on just a second. Hold on, Ms. Dewar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you, really thank you for your explanation of conflicts. I think part of the issue is there are really two things at play. Councilmember Breckus or Ms. Breckus is right about one of them and wrong about one of them. The one that she's right on is that we should be routinely going out for bids to analyze any of the services that we take in as an organization. That's because it is important, I think, both from a public process standpoint and for an organization to ensure that we are getting the best value for the services that are rendered, right? And I think that that's absolutely true. As a lawyer, I think I can confidently say that any organization of this size should be out there every 3 to 5 years routinely looking at all of their services, whether that's accounting or legal services, anything that happens outside. It may be that because of the overwhelming institutional knowledge of an existing outside, we'll call it vendor for the purposes of just homogenizing it, that is a value add. Then you're looking at the person who's doing the work. You're looking at the various types of work that can be done, and also about the rate structure. I mean, I look at the board packet and it's a bit incomplete because it does not include what the current rates are, who pays what for what services. I'm looking at a 2016 letter from one of the most fantastic lawyers that McDonald Carano has employed over the years, but it's 8 years old now. And so that is ultimately absolutely true. The second part, though, is this explanation discussion about conflicts, and there Ms. Breckus is wrong. She's wrong for a couple of reasons. One, because unfortunately she's chosen to weaponize this question of conflicts, and I don't think that's necessary to have this discussion. We can have the discussion about what is important about the board's policies without saying that any particular person has committed an ethics violation. So McDonald Carano Wilson as a law firm is above reproach. Although I don't know Mr. Folletta well, the attorneys with that firm are very careful to make sure they engage in the ethical practice of law at all times. And the reason why that's true, and true for lawyers writ large, is because as lawyers, what we have is our reputation, and we also have the backstop of knowing, A, that we know a few things about ethics. We know about the American Bar Association's Code of Ethics. Our own state has its own ethical canons, and those canons guide the decisions that we must enter into each time we determine whether or not a new relationship is formed and whether those relationships are compromised by the relationships we have with other entities. And so, again, I think the important part of the discussion is that we should, A, not pretend we are lawyers when we are not. B, I think it is important and incumbent upon all of us to acknowledge what the chair said, which is that Reno, and I would say even larger, Nevada, is a very small place. And certainly the specialized knowledge that it takes to work in any particular agency, especially when it's talking about the complexities of water law, the overlap between that and administrative processes, the fact that there are a number of things that are unique about this tells me that we can find good lawyers to do the work, and that those conflicts do not have to present conflict issues. When they are, either you seek waivers or acknowledgments of those conflicts. And I appreciate that both you and Mr. Zimmerman are lawyers. Certainly I'll use my best judgment as a lawyer to make those decisions about what is and what is not a conflict. And again, when those conflicts arise, as first-year lawyers, we're taught to get help or get out, right? So sometimes it's going to the state bar and asking for an opinion. Sometimes it's going to the ethics commission. And, this claim that the rules of ethics that govern elected officials is the same or co-equal to that which govern the legal profession is also not true. And I think that again, it's this part of an ongoing weaponization of those things that really should be concerning to all of us as elected officials, especially when some are looking for ways to create theatrics or drama when none really exist, but they seek conspiracy theory in avenues where they don't really exist, but they want to continue those conspiratorial type claims for their own, in this case, ill benefit or ill will. And I don't think we have to do that. We can be respectful of the process, respectful of the people involved, without making claims that are really conspiratorial in nature and unnecessary to the provision of good governance. And again, I thank you for your presentation because it started from the right point, which is talking about the difference between conflicts of interest, conflicts of law, conflicts of how they challenge the way in which we interact with one another, because I think that's the focus. The other focus is a red herring and really intended to seek headline rather than good governance.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Ms. Stewart, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I have had an opportunity to speak to this issue before on this board and other boards. And similar to Mr. Reese, I guess what I generally do is look for a best practice. And I think it is a best practice to periodically, and I'm not claiming what period that is, although 4 years has often been chosen by boards I've sat on, to review all types of outside services and to ask for either a rebid if it's a biddable service or if it's a service that is managed by a RFQ, to look for qualified applicants, as we did on Western Regional Water Commission when Mr. Rhodes retired. I think it's a very good, just sort of quality process to go through to just do a check. And so my recommendation, as I have already made that recommendation here, I'm very consistent in my view on this, is that I think we should periodically evaluate and ask for new submissions to provide services. And I would support that in legal services as well. I've been on this board 8 years. We have had the same counsel. I've had an excellent representation from McDonald Carano. I worked with them on a variety of lawsuits, and I found them very good. But I do recognize the perception of conflict, whether there is a legal conflict or a conflict of interest. I'm not sure, as a non-lawyer, I understand the difference, but regardless, that's not my big issue. My big issue is just implementing a best practice for provision of contract services. So I would support one, either at least periodically, and that might be this next year, asking for submissions, just as we did with WRWC, or I might even have given another thing, several of my colleagues have said about the size of Reno and how fast it's growing and how many groups come before our staff with requests for water, many different groups. We may be at the point where we do need to strengthen our legal department. We have Ms. Morris, and it sounds like she is pretty darn busy with everything she's handling. We may need a secondary attorney to deal with open meeting law issues and board representation, just as we do at our jurisdictions. All of our jurisdictions have in-house counsel. And I think the issues here at Tomah are pretty complex and could potentially deserve in-house counsel. And it might be the best way to go, to sort of take it out of this realm of other people presenting in front of us or, questions about them arising. We could put it aside by just having that service in-house. We have an in-house attorney at Flood, for example. Some of you serve on that board. We obviously have Ms. Morris, but it also sounds like this is a bigger book of business, so to speak, and might need some support. So those are two things I would recommend, is either we periodically go out or we look internally through the budget process about adding additional legal staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so hold on just a second, Ms. Hill. What I'm hearing from a couple of you is potentially we bring back an agenda item to crack open our policies, our direct policies, because I don't think we're here today to discuss changing those policies. That's not the way that the agenda item is crafted as I read it. So we can, and I want to continue this conversation, but we can certainly look at, how we deal with vendors. I would caution us not to just say to our legal representation, well, we're going to examine your contract every 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, and then we don't examine the same kinds of contracts across the board for everyone who's a vendor to Tumwa. So let's be careful about how we deal with this, and let's just be cognizant, because we could put ourselves into, paint ourselves into a corner. Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look at this issue in more detail. I like the idea of coming back with some policies. And certainly, if there was more information to the board on the contract that we have with McDonald and Carano, so we'd understand, can we afford to hire another staff member full-time? Is that something that makes sense? Because obviously, the way that the staff report was written, it said we could just use Ms. Morris, but obviously Ms. Morris is doing a lot more than, just conducting the meeting. And so, having a more robust discussion of whether we need another in-house counsel. So I'm hoping that that's enough direction to Mr. Zimmerman to bring something back to the board.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Zimmerman, please.
So just going back, so yes, the agenda item as requested was legal representation at board meetings, SAC meetings, and legislative subcommittee meetings. So that's the agenda item for today. I've heard all the comments and appreciate them. As far as the rates for board representation right now, it goes back to Mike Pawnee's 2016 letter of $275 an hour for that type of representation. So since 2016, and even before that, but when I came on in 2016, and then when Ms. Morris came on in 2021, we both, when the legal issue comes up, we look toward McDonald Carano to see if we think they have a lawyer with the expertise and experience to take on the issue. But there are often times where we decide, even before going to them, that there's another attorney in another law firm, maybe not even in Reno, that has the expertise we need, and we reach out directly to them. And so that's how internally we've been looking at legal services outside of the board realm. And then as far as future attorney, adding another attorney, as far as our succession planning, we're looking towards that. It's probably not in the next year or so, but ultimately we're going to have to add more, another lawyer in-house to assist staff with all the legal work. And so I just wanted to add that context. And then as far as handling conflicts, just the specific example was Stonegate. So in that case, Mike Pawnee represented Stonegate on non-Tumwa water matters and notified us of that. And so at that time, we were talking about an annexation agreement and negotiating that. And so Stonegate got other legal counsel to represent them on the annexation, and I represented Tumwa on our side of the annexation agreement. So just an example of how we worked through that process.
Okay, thank you. Anyone who has not had an opportunity to speak yet? Okay, Ms. Breckus, hold on I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time, I just wanted to address one factual issue that
Okay,
Ms. Breckus brought up.
go ahead.
Thank you. And really just for the benefit of anybody in the public who might be listening, my personal client roster does not include any builders, developers, or specific entities that have business before Tumwa. The lobbying disclosure you saw, that's the same list of clients are on all three of those disclosures. That's because as a business, we put all of the firm's lobbying clients on everyone's lobbying disclosure, just to cover us in the event that there's a side conversation that one of us finds ourselves in, so that we are complying with the legislature's rules on those disclosures. I also note, just with respect to how we handle conflicts, to the extent it's relevant to people, not only am I fully aware of what those rules are that govern my profession, but I'm also a member of the Northern Nevada Disciplinary Panel for the State Bar, where we deal with questions of conflicts of interest as they arise. When members of the public make complaints about how their lawyer has acted, that's the panel that those complaints go to, and we resolve them and propose discipline according to the rules.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Folletta. Ms. Breckus.
Yeah, a lot's been said, but, best practice for going out, I think we've approached that period right now. And whether it's policy setting on reviewing all, or this one narrowly, which is before us, that's what I advocate at this at this point in time. Now, about conflicts of interest in the Nevada ethics laws. If Mr. Folletta was an employee like Ms. Morris or Mr. Zimmerman sitting down at the end, rather than a contract person, and he had a commitment in a private capacity, whether or not some of his income at the end of the year from McDonald Carano came from Toll Brothers or Stonegate, in my understanding, that would be a conflict. Likewise, we're going to do human resources policies here pretty soon, and moonlighting would have to be an issue too, because in effect, he has a business interest outside of Tumwa. So this is having a hired person to sit here with us is a go-around from other ways that have that person be a subject employee. When I came on to Tumwa, we didn't have any attorneys. Mr. Zimmerman was hired not as an attorney, general counsel, but as the resource manager originally, correct?
So correct, I came on as water resources manager, but part of my duties were legal in nature, and I represented Tumwa in that capacity.
That supports the reason to go out and rebid, because Tumwa has moved in the 8 years I've been on in a different way with developing our in-house expertise. In my view, we don't use Mr. Folletta, and we rarely use Mr. Pogny as a water expert outside of staffing the subcommittee. It was really on open meeting law issues and board, and so I think if we went out and bid and wanted to go that route, you'd find a whole lot of other folks who probably at the end of the year when their bonuses come in or their compensation is made, don't get paid by people who are sitting across the table from our staff in discovery processes. And so that scope would be very interesting to see what we need, and I think we need something different since we've enhanced the general, the counsel role and the legal expertise in-house. So if the desire is not to hire, an associate to be, get their baby job, starting job here is to learn open meeting law, we can find that person in outside counsel, and you'd be surprised, I think, how many more you find. But I don't find it tenable. I've been very uncomfortable having Michael Pogny sit before the Reno City Council on Stonegate, knowing he's our Tumwa attorney, and talk about water issues.
Talk about Mr. Pawnee, or are we here to talk about Mr. Folletta?
See a McDonald Carano,
Okay.
our general counsel.
Mr. Pawnee
Okay.
really shouldn't even be
Likewise,
part of
let's
this.
talk about Toll Brothers. If we really want to look into this, how many times has our staff sat with Toll Brothers representatives on specific issues, not general, but specific issues in the last 2 years?
Okay.
How regularly do they? That's a problem to me. And this last point is, small town relationships go on. You got to start to think about a big town and that you can't govern and do the public service and interests based upon relationships. That's a no-go when you're serving everyone's interests. Thank you.
So I take offense to the fact that our lawyer is merely an open meeting law lawyer. I think he does a lot more than that. And I have used them to advise me on a number of things as we're looking at agenda items that come before us. So that, I think that's an oversimplification. Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I understood it and reading the board packet, there were 3 ideas floated as recommendations to staff. Idea 1 was continue to use the McDonald Carano law firm. That for me is a no-go. The second was use internal legal counsel. I think Ms. Morris has said that for her is a no-go and perhaps is not really the way to do it, which leaves us with 3, which is advertise a request for proposals for other legal representation. And that's where I fall, is that I do believe we should go out and advertise for legal representation. It is absolutely possible that McDonald Carano will be the one selected through that process. I don't have any doubt that they would propose their ideas, that they would make a presentation, however they would go about it. So again, it's no slight to McDonald Carano, who I, again, think is one of the most outstanding law firms in our state and have just outstanding lawyers at every level. So that's where I land. And so the direction that I would give if asked to make a motion is the third option that is presented in the board packet.
Okay? Anyone else? Ms. Hill?
Is that a motion?
Well,
We're still under
Okay.
discussion. To my knowledge,
Mr.
we're still
Chair.
under discussion. Ms. Dewar?
yeah, I just want to add, I made a pretty long statement at the first, but I would support that proposal just for a best practice. As a start, we don't have to change everything in the moment, but we have to start somewhere, and I think it's a good place to start. Number two, I don't want to dissuade Mr. Zimmerman from evaluating. He already went on record as saying that they were already looking at expanding their legal office because there's too much to do. And it's exceeding the grasp of one person. And so I don't want to take that off the table. If we move forward with Mr. Reese's option, I still want to make sure that Mr. Zimmerman has the ability, or we acknowledge that he may bring before us a request, independent even of this discussion, for additional legal services. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. All right, anyone else? Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, I will close public comment. I'll bring it back to the board. I'm looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I was not prepared to make a motion, but I did want to say something in response to Member Dewar's comment. And that is, it's not always as easy as just having in-house legal counsel. It is difficult to both be legal counsel and then be tasked with doing things outside of the building. So I want to make sure that I'm clear and on the record. I served as the general legal counsel for a company historically, and I still had to hire outside legal services, in large part because at times when you're in-house counsel for an entity and therefore captive, you are ultimately potentially the one who will be a witness in issues that arise out of that representation. So you can't always do both. You can't be in-house counsel and then run out to have a court appearance. It's difficult to do that. You also don't necessarily have the staff necessary, like paralegal staff and
Exactly.
research staff. So
Exactly.
I want to make sure that I caution my colleagues simply from my life experience that it's not enough to just say we're going to have in-house counsel and then expand that role. They are different things, and sometimes it is necessary to have expertise outside of the organization. And quite frankly, from a board level perspective, oftentimes we want to make certain that the board's interests are being represented. That does not always necessarily mean that staff's interest is being represented. As electeds, we may have differences of opinion, and sometimes the issues that we have between our board council are questions about what staff is doing, and so you have to make sure there are demarcated lines in those two things. So while I understand that there might be some issue about the budget and how we expand our legal services team in-house, it's not in exception to that. I think about RTC, which has obviously general counsel and have other lawyers in the body, but also still have to go outside of that body at times for representation. Maybe it's on an employment-related matter, or again, I think I've said my piece. Thank you so much.
And if, Mr. Chair, I just want to go on record as saying I appreciate the comment, but I've been on the board a long time. The staff already hire outside counsel for specialized activities. That was included in the staff report. I'm not suggesting that change in any way. We have to hire additional counsel or specialized counsel depending on the issue, and I expect that to continue no matter what we do. I just saying, apparently the issues in-house maybe need some additional support, as well as continuing to hire the outside counsel that Mr. Reese is talking about, and Mr. Zimmerman already spoke to as well.
Okay. Ms. Breckus?
Yeah, and I just, conceptually, and I agree with all that too, is at some point your general counsel in a complex organization becomes more of a project manager than doing law themselves. And that's something I do know about because, my field is professional services, so you move more into project manager. And I certainly, with dealing with water law, recognize that that's where you want to reserve your general counsel roles. So, that concept is not lost on me. Let me try a motion since this was one that I brought forward.
May I
Oh,
say something
okay,
before you,
yeah.
we're still
I'm
under
sorry,
discussion?
I didn't know if you were ready.
Okay, yep, no, I'm not ready yet. So I will just put on the record that I'm not supportive of making a change right now. I'm supportive of making a policy change, which could come back to us that basically talks about how often we go out. I don't think we've given Mr. Folletta enough time to be our counsel. He's still relatively new. I think he's done a very good job. I'm comfortable with the representation that we've had. And so I want to make sure that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just, going out for the sake of going out and doing an exercise without having a policy in place that dictates the amount of time that we say, and whatever it is, it's 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it happens to be, that we routinely go out unless there's some other extenuating circumstance. And my question is to the board, is there an extenuating circumstance as to why we're going to go out and look for counsel right now? Does that exist? It's a rhetorical question. Does it exist? And so from there, I'll let members make motions. Floor is yours.
I think that if we go the way you're suggesting, you bring back a whole suite of other professional services contracts that may exist. And so that is a problem, but we're going to do some policy work here very soon, and I think maybe your concept is more akin in that. I will make a motion that we direct Mr. Zimmerman to bring forward a sample scope RFP, much akin to the Western Water Regional Water did a couple years ago, to rebid outside general counsel. Bring us the scope that he proposes. Also, bring forward an organizational chart so we can understand how the legal division is organized, and let us know other active legal contracts and how much we've been spending on legal services. And at that point, the board would make a decision whether or not to go forward and issue it or not.
Okay, have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Request for a board adoption of update of administrative policies to acknowledge changes to the administrative directives. Ms. Atkinson.
Good morning still. Jessica Atkinson for the record. Attached to the staff report for this item is a copy of our updated administrative instructions. Internally, we refer to these as our AIs. So in my presentation today, if I say AI, that's what I mean. In other organizations, you'll hear these documents referred to as employee handbook. That's essentially what we're talking about. Before I go through some of the changes that we made to these documents, I wanted to give you a little bit of a history on them. Back in 2001, May, the board approved the first set of administrative instructions that were needed to operate Truckee Meadows Water Authority. A year later, in May of 2002, during that board meeting, approval of any changes to these instructions was delegated to the general manager with direction to provide notice via email to the board. So over the years, you've probably seen emails when we've made some changes, mostly regulatory updates that have happened. The last full review of this set of documents was in 2008. So almost 15 years has passed since we looked at the entire set of documents collectively. And a lot's changed during that period of time, not just on the legal landscape, but the way that we conduct and manage our business. Many of the administrative instructions that were in place from 2008 were very procedure-based. A lot of those procedures back then were paper or manual, and with the technology, we are now operating in a more automated environment. So over the last 2 years, this really has been a labor of love that's spanned 2-year period of time. We've sat down with all of our department supervision managers, directors. We've made recommendations. We sent those recommendations to both our labor attorneys as well as our general employment attorneys. Our internal legal resources have looked at this. We have definitely spent a lot of time. The original documents, just an aside, I think were in WordPerfect. So I spent probably days trying to figure out how to make edits from WordPerfect into Word. I've learned more about Word than I ever thought I would need to. So in addition to this exhaustive internal process to look at these, we also send those to IBEW, the complete set. There are specific administrative instructions within that set that are negotiated and identified in the contract as negotiated. And those are progressive discipline, drug and alcohol-free workplace, the Department of Transportation drug and alcohol-free testing programs. And so this process also included sending those to IBEW. We do have a signed memo on file with them. They've accepted the changes to that. I want to point out with this new version of the administrative instructions, we created a distinction between administrative policies and administrative directives. That didn't exist before. And we believe this distinction is important because it separates overarching board-adopted policies, which are really intended to establish a strong compliance culture, from the organizational directives, which are more operational in nature, kind of how we function, procedures, how things happen. The administrative policies are rules, procedures, or expectations that are adopted by the board. They have overarching legal or fiscal impact on the organization. And because they are board adopted, they set the tone from the top down and serve the purpose of protecting employees' rights and safeguarding the company's interests. So you'll see them, they're the first set of documents that are in this booklet that we have. Some examples are equal employment opportunity and non-discrimination, the accommodations policy, prohibited harassment, discrimination, retaliation, open communication and complaint resolution, both of the policies that touch on drug and alcohol use, our leave policies, anti-nepotism, workplace violence prevention, those are some examples. The administrative directives, those are the second set that fall, are procedures or expectations that are authorized and issued by the general manager. These directives are more operational in nature, and because of this, they may require more frequent or instantaneous changes. And so I'll just go through a couple examples that we have identified as directives: acceptable computer use, identification and company key control, work time schedules, workplace searches, vehicle use and accident prevention, loss of required driver's licenses or certifications, notification of updated personnel information, corrective actions, progressive discipline, employment reference, and verification. So future changes to the administrative policies, those are the ones that our board adopted, would come to the board for consideration and approval going forward. And then, as has been the case since 2002, changes to the directives would be provided to the board as a notice, an email notice with that information. So just to go through some of the content revisions to highlight it, there were a lot of changes. We made changes to the formatting. If you looked at the old versions to the new version, we changed the order. This was a massive overhaul, but some of the content changes were made to reflect current changes in protected classes. We changed administrative instruction A02. It was formerly titled Americans with Disabilities Act, and this is now accommodations policy, and weaved into that includes provisions for pregnancy accommodations, nursing accommodations, religious accommodations, domestic violence victim accommodations. A04 is information technology and telecommunications. This is now acceptable use for computers. This directive now reflects the current business practices related to cybersecurity. A05, drug and alcohol-free workplace, has been updated to account for legalization of medical marijuana and recreational marijuana decriminalization. A06 been revised to keep up with the updates from the DOT. There was a lot of updates there that had to be incorporated into that. A11, which is the leave administration, has been amended to add Juneteenth as an observed holiday, a provision to add holiday pay for non-represented employees who work other than the standard Monday through Friday work week, where they don't observe holidays on Mondays or Fridays for the most part. Let's see here. Under PTO, the cap on PTO eligible for rollover increased from 160 to 320 annually, and there was a provision added for school activities leave. Administrative instruction A14 has been updated to include 2 voluntary leave donation banks, one for each employment classification. So there's now a represented voluntary leave donation bank and a non-represented voluntary leave donation bank. We removed administrative instructions related to purchasing and contracts. There's a separate board-approved policy that relates to that. Instead, what we did is we created in our standards of conduct that says you follow that policy instead of having multiple policies that are similar. Individual instructions similarly were related to records and information management and job abandonment. They were also removed and just summarized in the rules of conduct. So once the board adopts, if the board adopts the administrative policies and acknowledges the changes to the administrative directives, then we will start the process of disseminating this information with employees, which will include not just providing them the information, but we'll host kind of road shows, if you will, where we can do some question and answers. There's not really a lot of material changes that's really going to be much different than the way that we normally operate. But nonetheless, we'll make ourselves available to answer any questions that might come up along the way. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, questions? Ms. Breckus?
You know, congratulations. This is a real big undertaking, and it's just really nice to see it come before us. And I love this stuff. And this is just, you know, outsider concept is one, I would think, and I do think in some settings, it's okay to put in there, these do not apply to the governing board unless otherwise stated. And you may think, you know, just, I'm not asking for a response now, but you may want to think about some of them. And I'll just say why. I worked for the city of Reno for many years, and I came back as an elected. And you could always put your, like, personal mail in the little box, you know, where the mail got picked up on all the floors. And I think it was my birthday card to my mom in the box. And about 5 days later, the mail gal down in the basement came up with the letter and said, you know, don't do that. You can't do that. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. But they had written a policy that, you know, said you can't use that. It's not incidental. But the governing body didn't know because they weren't subject to them. But there are instances where the governing body should be subject to a policy related to, you know, good building usage or something like that. So I just want to suggest that. I know you have a media one in there. I don't really see it in there, but you might have, say, like, if the board goes on a field trip somewhere and you have a travel policy in terms of, you know, showing receipts or something, you know, so that's one. Number two is, I think A41, the word at will is not a defined term. And that's a really hard concept for me to understand. I understand represented under non-represented, but it basically says everyone's at will. And I don't know what that means. And I would love to see that as a defined term. And then the nepotism policy. It would give me comfort to see an obligation or a directive to have a nepotism report annually in some way, or a requirement on the general manager to report any nepotism that he may have, because it did come up. And I think it's a good practice. That does bring in questions also related to your general manager. We found at the city of Reno a long time ago that we had everything covered on all our personnel policies except for the city manager, because that person fell out. And I don't know if you've given any thought to that. It's just one that you do have to have some provisions for when the board has issues with the general manager. But the nepotism one is one that I would like to see enhanced. I don't know if you, you know, how you deal with, can you outline that one and how it works?
So, Jessica Atkinson for the record. Yes, what happens, there's kind of two different processes. There's the process where you're hiring somebody in. Their application asks that they disclose whether or not they have any relationships within Truckee Meadows Water Authority. We do a review when we get those applications to see if they've identified anybody, and if there is, we compare that against the policy, and then we determine, do we have any hierarchical situations, you know, lines of reporting type of relationships? Could this potentially be a conflict within the policy? If it doesn't create a conflict at face, the individual goes through the interview process, potentially if they qualify, because they're still looked at amongst their skills and qualifications. And then if they end up being a finalist for the position, then we again meet with the general manager. We sit down and we look at the qualifications of the other finalists, and then a determination is made within the confines of the policy.
Okay, so somewhere there's a list of people who are hired on and whether they have a nepotism relation, and relationships change, you know, marriages, divorces, and so on. But then there was also the provision of, you said there's two, is the other one nepotism if you develop a relationship, familial relationship with someone in your.
Exactly right. The other one is what you're touching on, is if somebody, you know, falls in love, meets, or, you know, family members get married and now you're cousins type of thing.
Yeah.
It does.
My wife at work.
Yeah, and so the new version of this policy actually does better outline that and has a timeline in which to make us aware of any new or dissolved type of relationships that may occur, so that we could go through the same level of analysis. So one happens through disclosure on the application, and the other might happen as a result of a new or dissolved relationship.
Okay, and then the general manager nepotism, how is that dealt
went
with?
through
If there
the-
was, okay.
Yeah, we went through the
Okay.
exact same process.
Okay, and could, if there was a nepotism relationship, say there's someone there who has a relative in the organization, and say that person goes for an internal promotion, would that person then be excluded from being on a panel? Because a lot of times, you know, you convene panels and so on.
You're correct. That would exclude them from being
Okay,
able to
okay, so you have
participate.
that guideline. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, well, I just wanted to bring it up, and I think I feel comfortable, and so, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Reese.
Thank you. I appreciate, Ms. Atkinson, the presentation, and quite frankly, excellent work product on your part. I want to say a couple of things. One is, what outside assistance have you had in the review of this process? Meaning, most of our HR folks in this community have resources, whether it's SHRM or they're part of Pool Pack, or they have outside legal counsel reviewing their stuff. Because of course, employment law is ever-changing. You're learning all the time about the newest thing in employment law. So I just sort of want to ask that question and maybe find out what the response is, and then I have a couple of other questions.
Sure. We regularly partner with the Nevada Association of Employers. We're a member of that. It's a great group. One membership fee, and they have a lot of attorneys, actual former labor commissioner that's on there. And so we regularly reach out to them when we have questions. This specific version went through our attorneys, at the time, Holland and Hart. They have a specialist that does labor type of stuff, and then Dora Lane, who did the general employment. And then, like I said, Steph, Jay-Z, myself, we all sat down.
Yeah, outstanding. Thank you for that, because certainly Holland and Hart and Miss Lane specifically is incredibly gifted in this area. And so it gives me some level of comfort that you're telling me that this additional layers of review internally and externally happen. And ultimately, it kind of goes back to our conversation on the prior board item about why we have outside counsel. And so thank you for making that point. The last thing I'll say is, I just want us to continue to focus all of our efforts governmentally by looking at our board policies and employment policies through that diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to sit with and understand some of the changing landscape as it relates to how those policies are viewed. And so with a small agency, that can be sometimes difficult. At the City of Reno, of course, we've recently hired a full-time person to be involved in this space and given some staff to it. And so I just think as we move forward, I looked at some of the precatory and preamble statements in the board policy, and it includes things like looking at discrimination based on hairstyle, for example, which was a change in the last legislative cycle. And so I thank you for making sure that we are leading as an organization in those areas, because although a small thing, if we focus on those diversity, equity, inclusion issues, I think we will be strengthened as an organization, and it also helps us in our recruitment efforts as we look to be a reflection of the community that we serve. And so, again, thank you for the hard work that went into it. I think that's excellent. Thank you for informing me about the additional outside sort of eyes that have been on it. And then last, just my continued hope that as an organization, and certainly from an HR function forward, that we are continuing every day to think about the way in which our diverse hiring practices and our inclusion of people would strengthen the organization. So doing everything through that lens is, I think, very important.
Okay. I think you've done a great job, Ms. Atkinson. I'm thrilled with this, and in fact, I'm not willing to pull any other spices out of the cabinet and try to spice up the soup or make it any better. I think you've done a great job. So I'm personally I just want to leave it alone. Here's something I've learned in our organization: you hire really good people and you let them do their job. And so I try. Novel concept. Novel concept, right? I try not to jump into your business too often. So I think you've done an incredible job. Ms. Stewart, do you have anything?
I'm so glad to see this, and I had, I think at a previous board meeting, asked for it to come back to the board, and I do think it's good to have a check-in. I appreciate the concept of having the manager revise the policies and just send us a heads up that they've done so. But I think that, an occasional board review, just like an occasional update of the water plan or going out for bid or whatever, is very healthy practice. So thank you, Ms. Atkinson.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, you're looking for us to adopt this. So am I correct in that? That's the way.
So the recommended motion is that the board adopt the updated administrative policies.
Correct.
Those are the overarching ones, and acknowledge the changes that were made to the administrative directives.
Okay, looking for a motion. Ms. Stewart.
I would like to make the motion.
Okay,
Mr. Chair.
go right ahead.
And I have a comment as well.
Okay, so I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. I have a motion by Ms. Stewart, second by Mr. Reese. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment? Okay, under discussion.
Ms. Atkinson, I just have a question. I briefly reviewed your policy on harassment, and I just wondered on that particular one, we spent quite a bit of time at Reno updating ours when we found it deficient. And I didn't know, I know that Mr. Reese already asked you if somebody else reviewed it, but I didn't know if you had an opportunity on that one or related policies to look at it, what any other agencies had done in your process.
I have not looked at any other agencies. When it comes to that particular policy, there's really some prescribed best practices that need to be followed. And so this is one where I would say that there's a high likelihood that if you compared against other entities that have done a recent legal review, all of the critical elements are probably going to line up pretty much the same.
May I ask? I
Perfect.
know.
I think one of our issues was as much process. If someone does happen to file a complaint, what the process that complaint goes through. And it's not like citing the proper legal precedent, but more how is it handled internally? When would an outside investigator be involved? When would they not? When does it rise to the level? Those are the kind of questions that I was wondering about. And then secondly, and I don't want to embarrass Mr. Zimmerman, but I mean, just generally, does it apply to the general manager? Or are they excluded? Is there a separate policy that applies to them?
It does apply to the general manager. There is no exclusion there. If you guys recall, it was less than a year ago that we made some changes to this as a result of some discussion amongst the board. And as a result of that change, what we did is we implemented a process where if individuals felt that there was not a member within our management team that they could go to bring a complaint forward, we created an additional channel through our legal sources that they could go to. So for example, specifically the general manager at the time, assistant general manager, human resources is identified within that policy. So if somebody felt that they had a complaint against any of those individuals and didn't feel comfortable bringing it forward, there's an additional channel that they could go through. And then each situation is a case-by-case analysis. And we always partner with our outside legal firm whenever we have any kind of complaint under this particular policy, because it's, in my mind, it's that critical of a situation that it's important to have an outside set of eyes look at it, and then we follow the guidance based on their recommendations.
Just one follow-up. That is exactly what I wanted to hear, that if someone felt they could not go to the designated senior management managers or management team, they had an alternative, and I was part of that, and I do remember that, and I just wanted to make sure it was reflected. The second thing is, just going back to the legal counsel, is the HR outside counsel different than the general counsel for the board?
Yes.
That's Dora.
Okay, so we have a separate human resources oriented firm that does that.
That is correct.
Right, thank you.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, and I
Still under
apologize. I really hate to ask questions when we have motions on the table, and I think we do have a motion on the table.
motion
But
and a second.
I forgot to ask this. I didn't notice, or have you given thought to having a remote work policy? It's maybe not as applicable to y'all because you're very much in the field operations oriented, but I know a lot of organizations are working on those right now, and
So we don't have a policy or a directive, but what we have within our policy is some language that talks about flexible work arrangements. And we have a separate SOP that addresses remote work. And so within that SOP, I mean, we have a lot of field-centric positions that it's not feasible to do your job from a remote work environment. But within that SOP, the guidelines is that there has to be a healthy amount of in-office as well as remote work so that we can collaborate, especially in our organization when we're seeing so many retirements. It's really critical that we are able to have kind of the download of information and the exchange of ideas. So where the performance and the position makes sense, there is the option of individuals requesting to work up to 2 days remote.
oh, okay, so you're that dialed in on it. Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
Okay. All right, we have a motion by Ms. Dewar, second by Mr. Reese. We have taken discussion. We've asked for public comment. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. That takes us now to item number 15, the General Manager's Report. Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything to report. I just wanted to thank Mayor Lawson for filling in for Director Dare at this meeting. And I can tell you that Mr. Dare's recovery and health is on the minds of all of our staff members, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Thank you.
Mr. Lawson reminded me that he is the pretty face, so I'm glad to have that. Finally. All right, we will close item number 15, take it to item 16, public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone wishing to speak at this time? No. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak? Seeing none, I will close item 16, bring it back to the board. Item number 17, board comments. Mr. Lawson.
Just as a quick update on Christopher, he is doing well. As you can imagine, when you take a piece of your brain out, it's not as easy operation, but he's recovering. He's doing physical therapy daily. That wears him out. He has some concentration issues, but that's to be expected at this point. That was a portion of the brain that they messed around with. And he is not following doctor's orders. He answers everyone's emails and texts. So I'm just urging you to help me, to help him to recover. We need him back. So, but he's doing very, very well for what he was. He's only in the hospital for just a day. So it was, he came through the operation extremely well. So we're looking for him to be back and in front of all of us doing his thing, probably in the next 45 days or so. So just so you know, he's doing very, very well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and our thoughts and prayers are with Mr. Dare. Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This came up a few times during the meeting, and I know it's come up with me before, but I haven't specifically asked for it. Can we please have a motion recommendation in our staff reports? It just seems like we're missing parts of motions, and I don't want to get into trouble later for not doing the right thing, so that would be very helpful for the board. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. That takes us to Mr. Lawson's favorite item number. That's item 18. We are adjourned.